During the calamitous handling of the proposed J.J. Abrams scripted Superman Man of Steel trilogy, during which time McG would be replaced by Brett Ratner, and Brett Ratner would be replaced by McG, there was a moment when director Wolfgang Petersen was offered the project. Petersen would politely decline, but asked Warner Brothers, why not get Batman involved? Executive Vice President for Worldwide Motion Pictures, Lorenzo di Bonaventura would embrace the suggestion wholeheartedly, and Petersen was given the go-ahead to get to work setting up a Superman-Batman big-screen team-up. The Batman franchise at that time had fallen off the tracks and was now bouncing around in oblivion. After Tim Burton's Batman and Batman Returns came Joel Schumacher's Batman Forever and Batman and Robin. Irreparable mistakes were made, and the issue at hand now was to find a way of getting back to restoring Batman's big-screen potential, and telling a story that wouldn't turn the Dark Knight into a neon-lit laughingstock. Warner Brothers had Frank Miller and Darren Aronofsky working on adapting Miller's Batman Year One book into a screenplay. There was also a live-action, futurescape cyberpunk take on Batman Beyond to be directed by Boaz Yakin, in which an aging Bruce Wayne hands over the Batman mantle to teenage protege Terry McGinnis, in a plot that would include the Joker downloading his own consciousness into a computer. Meanwhile, George Clooney, still under contract to play Batman in any Part 5, would offer his thoughts on what would work, saying, you do the movie cheap, in a film noir style. Make Batman the Dark Knight, something Tim Burton didn't even do. You start at Alfred's burial, with a Sam Spade film noir narrator, talking to this death figure standing there that only he sees. Go into the first big action set piece with Robin, and he gets killed. None of these solo Batman projects would come to pass, and Di Bonaventura was still actively involved in Abrams' solo Superman flyby project. He had much love for the Abrams screenplay and had previously called both Alan Horn and Barry Meyer, the chief executive of Warner Brothers, urging them to read it. It had more epic ambition than earlier Superman scripts, Di Bonaventura would say in public. But despite the support of Superman flyby, the studio announced 3 days later that it would begin filming Superman vs. Batman in February, with Petersen in the director's seat. Abrams kept working, despite the over-the-shoulder threat of a project that threatened to leave his own in the shade. John Peters wasn't pleased at all. Abrams and Brassel met in Di Bonaventura's office on the Warner lot in Burbank to discuss it. According to John Peters, Di Bonaventura explained that he liked the script and said that the studio wanted to proceed with both movies, but hoped to release Batman vs. Superman first. According to Peters, Abrams was unimpressed. Peters would say that Abrams told the studio, "You can't do that," and that releasing Batman vs. Superman first was akin to releasing a movie like When Harry Divorced Sally before When Harry Met Sally. But Di Bonaventura saw it in a different light, according to Warner executives. Firstly, the director Warner wanted for Superman, McG, was not available. Secondly, Di Bonaventura wanted to position Batman vs. Superman as a clash of two old superheroes, sure to attract fans of the earlier films, before reinventing the characters. Peters wanted to see his film made first, and he was backed by a growing chorus at Warner Brothers who agreed with him. The solo movie was almost a decade in the making, whereas all of this new talk of Batman vs. Superman seemed predicated on a whim. They worried about the darker movie's reception. If the audience hated it, that could kill off both franchises. And there was still the worry that a darker movie wouldn't play well to audiences looking for a colorful story full of hope, humor, and heroism. Andrew Kevin Walker, the highly talented screenwriter of David Fincher's Seven, was one of many writers summoned for the opportunity to pitch on the project. Walker had previously written a draft of X-Men and an unproduced Silver Surfer script, and was said to be thrilled to work on this ahead-of-its-time crossover epic that allowed for an exploration of much darker themes than your average superhero story. It was reported by AintItCool.com that the Walker treatment proposed a story that was set firmly in the same cinematic universe as Batman, Batman Returns, and Batman Forever. A plot that would see Lex Luthor Jr. take over LexCorp after the death of his father. This just being a loophole, and just a way for Lex to get out of all the legal trouble he's in with a faked death. Lex Jr. decides to create a mass market of machine men for large companies. These giant human and spider-like machines turn out to be incredible. Lex decides to take them to the World's Fair in Gotham. Clark Kent and Lois are sent there to cover the story. Lex's machines are then controlled by LexCorp and a satellite guarded with kryptonite. LexCorp can make these machines do anything he wants. The machines can link up with any computer online and get information to Lex. Lex starts to sense Batman is onto him, so he decides to use his untold wealth to fund a clone of the Joker to distract him. Until there is a huge final battle at the World's Fair. Not dissuaded by Peter's opposition to the competing idea, Warner's would officially break the news on the 9th of July 2002 that Wolfgang Petersen had been confirmed as the director of Batman vs. Superman. The project was initially slated for a summer 2004 release. "It is a clash of the titans," Petersen told Variety magazine. "They play off of each other so perfectly. Superman is clear, bright, all that it's noble and good, and Batman represents the dark, obsessive, and vengeful side. They are two sides of the same coin, and that is material for great drama." According to Warner Brothers, the story was a way to reinvigorate both characters, even though the theme was dark and the two superheroes fought during much of the film. After audiences were reintroduced to them, studio executives said they reasoned they could make new films based on separate storylines. As the concept was fleshed out into a 3-act structure, Petersen would tell MTV that, "You had it in some of the comic books, but never on the big screen. They're so different. I cannot tell you what really gets them together. I can say that much of the conflict is because of the different philosophies that they represent. Superman represents sort of everything clear and bright and noble. He represents our hopes and ideals. Batman, on the other hand, represents the dark and obsessive and vengeful side. The plot is structured in a way that these two very different sides, basically of the same coin, have to clash at some point because they handle situations totally differently. For a large portion of the thing, they're at each other's throats. But then, of course, because they are both crime fighters, they join forces again and fight evil." Asylum was the studio's codename for the screenplay, as with that title it would be far less likely to leak than Batman vs. Superman. Copies of the screenplay were printed on red paper because it was much harder to photocopy. Walker's script never leaked, but what did eventually get out was the rewrite. The draft opens with Superman intervening in a terrorist attack on the Freedom Monument in the center of Metropolis. The bomb blast causes structures to topple as Superman saves citizens and holds up falling buildings. Superman saves the terrorist as he is cornered by an angry mob. Superman vows the terrorist will face American justice when, boom, the bomber detonates a kryptonite-laced bomb in Superman's face. There's a note attached to the bomber that reads, "This is the beginning." We then move to events at Wayne Manor. Bruce Wayne is marrying a lady by the name of Elizabeth, with Clark present as Bruce's best man. Bruce is head over heels in love, but we learn that Clark and Lois are getting a divorce. It's been 5 years since Bruce has retired as the Batman. He explains to Clark that after the murder of Robin, it stopped being about justice and started being about revenge. That he became vengeful and bloodthirsty and wanted to kill his enemies, and that if he started killing, he knew wouldn't stop. As Bruce and Elizabeth enjoy their honeymoon, tragedy strikes. Elizabeth is killed by a poison dart containing Joker toxins. There's a message scrawled across the wall reading, "This is the beginning of the end." Bruce returns to Gotham. A lifetime of terrible loss and sadness is bubbling to the surface. He vows to find and kill whoever it was. Clark tries to talk him out of the rage, but Bruce directs it at him. He blames Clark for letting the terrorist live when both cases are clearly linked. Bruce returns to the Batcave for the first time in 5 years. Laboratories and supercomputers are reactivated. Alfred is now a computer-generated AI hologram that serves Bruce. Bruce analyzes the poison dart that killed his new wife. The Joker's toxin is identified, but since the Joker's dead, it must be a copycat. The same supposed terrorist that Clark saved from the mob. Bruce enters the Batcave's command center. The Bat computer flashes awake. Bruce crosses to a shining steel door. The door opens, and a light gleams down upon the Batman costume and cowl in storage, armored and black, awaiting resurrection. Bruce's eyes sad but determined. Bruce decides it's time to go back to work. Clark revisits his childhood home where he hears the ghostly advice of his parents that beyond Smallville, there's a whole world that needs him. Meanwhile, after a nighttime diamond safe robbery, the armed gang take off into the pipes below the streets. One by one, the gang members are stalked and picked off by a seemingly invisible hand. The gang get a little anxious as the word is there's a whack job running around wearing wings. The robbers get lost in the labyrinth of pipes. The paint signs they mark the walls with as directions have all been washed off. The last two remaining men come face to face with Batman. Batman punches both robbers, looks at his hands. The punches felt good. Only the gang leader remains. He shoots until his gun is empty. Batman deflects and dodges. He begins to beat the leader down with vented rage. You used to run with Joker. Spread the word. Batman lives. Batman tips the diamonds down through the drainage grate and disappears. Next day, the news reports there were 25 sightings of Batman. Many of the reported encounters with Gotham's criminals are described to have been unusually violent. As Clark reacquaints with childhood friend Lana Lang, Batman is out questioning Toyman about the origins of the poisonous dart. Toyman informs him that the Joker is back. Bruce begins to train intensely. He takes out the Batmobile, which is described as a sleek black missile as it rockets through the forest toward the cemetery. Batman stands before the grave. He swipes away the dead flowers and candles and begins to dig. He crowbars open the coffin, where a Jack-in-the-Box Joker dummy head springs up and a recorded Joker laughter track taunts him. Back at Kent Farm, Clark carefully extracts the kryptonite from the crash-landed craft that brought him to Earth. Weakening by the second, his skin pales as he manages to seal the green rock inside of a lead-lined box. Batman responds to a disturbance where he is ambushed by the Joker, who brandishes a flamethrower before leaving in an armored car. The Batmobile flies off in pursuit. Batman weaves through the aftermath as the Joker tosses colorful bouncing bombs at him. As Batman gains ground, the Joker produces a huge smiley-face bazooka, takes aim at the Batmobile, and fires. Target destroyed. Batman ejects from his seat. The Batmobile explodes as Batman flies skyward.
It's not a party until something gets broken,
taunts the Joker. Batman lands on the Joker's vehicle. He smashes his way through the windows but is thrown from the hood. The Joker savagely kicks a fallen and bruised Batman. He presses his foot down on Batman's throat. Then changes his mind. He lets him live for now and leaves the scene. The Joker vows soon enough Batman will experience agony and misery, and Joker will be there to drink the tears as Batman begs for death. Superman, meanwhile, learns that evil genius Lex Luthor has been plotting to put Superman and Batman at odds with each other. Lex tells Superman that the government has been secretly working on a project called Project Achilles, which would seek kryptonite weaponized into a bomb, which, if detonated in orbit, would render Earth uninhabitable for Superman. We also learned that the Joker is in fact a cloned replica, funded and brought to life by Lex Luthor. The Joker advertises to the city that tonight is the main event. Superman's pleas to Bruce to hold back from killing the Joker go ignored as Batman takes off to execute justice. Batman and Superman eventually face off. With Batman still angry, Superman let the Joker live. Batman launches missiles at Superman from the Batplane. Kryptonite explodes all around a weakened Superman who can't fight back as Batman connects with a flurry of punches. Superman can't get close, but he exhales, blowing away Batman in a cyclone that carries up and away, and he crashes through the treetops. Batman smash lands on the ground. Superman tries to talk sense into him, but Batman rises and charge tackles Superman into the fountain. He holds his head beneath the water. Batman's armor radiates with kryptonite as he chokeholds Superman and slams him down. They fight atop a skyscraper. Batman slips and tumbles down. He uses his grappling gun to hook himself back, but Batman crashes through the building's glass facade as the fight continues in the offices, crashing through walls and floors. The fight moves down through the pavement into the street. Batman uses the water from broken pipes to electrocute Superman repeatedly. As Superman lays torn and beaten, Batman continues to pummel him. Superman fights back, still weakened with kryptonite. He slams Batman into a parked car. He bludgeons Batman with a no parking sign and tells him to stay down. Batman's armor is broken, his helmet barely intact. Superman flies high and away. He tries to find a ray of sunshine to nourish himself. He rises higher and higher as, down below, Batman screws together a Kryptonian arrow. He takes aim at Superman, whispering, "You brought this on yourself," and fires. The arrow hits Superman in the shoulder. His cries break every window in the city. He drops through the sky, overcome with poisoning. His flesh goes pallid and gray. He's in excruciating pain. As Superman lands at Batman's feet, Batman snaps off the arrow and embeds it deep. The Joker speaks through a hacked link into Batman's helmet, tells him he can't retire, that the two of them must fight on until Batman dies at his hand. Then, the Joker appears in person. He tells Batman he hired Elizabeth to marry him, and that the entire thing was just a practical joke. She worked for him, and the Joker had to kill her just to hurt Bruce. Batman and the Joker fight. A weak Superman arrives just in time to help Batman as the Joker gains the advantage. Batman is in a position to finally kill the Joker, but changes his mind at the last second, as Clark asks him to do better than the criminals they chase, and spare the Joker his life. Lex Luthor appears and wears an exoskeleton nuclear weapon he's developed alongside the US government, who have also been developing secret weapon technology to stop Superman if ever the need arose. His armor gives him the superiority to take on both Batman and Superman. His kicks and punches send the hero spinning back. As Lex moves in towards Superman to unleash the killing blow, Batman emerges and flies toward Lex, and the two of them go over the ledge. They fight in midair. As Lex flails, the sunlight cracks open the clouds. The effect of the solar radiation on Lex's suit causes it to go into hyperpower, and it explodes, sending an explosion upwards. As Batman falls, the ground coming up quick, Superman appears, strengthened by the sun's yellow rays. He holds onto Batman's arm and flies him back up to safety. Clark and Bruce shake hands as friends, and then we see the two of them into the dawn and then gone. The end. It's unknown exactly which story elements were entirely the work of Goldsman. It's a given that Walker's original draft contained much darker beats than Warner Brothers would have felt comfortable with.
After Andy Kevin Walker on this version of Batman versus Superman, with Colin Farrell was cast as Batman, Jude Law was cast as Superman, Wolfgang Petersen was directing. We were in prep, and it was the darkest thing you've ever seen. It was, started with Alfred's funeral, and Bruce was had fallen in love, renounced being Batman. The Joker kills his wife, and then you discover that it was all a lie. That just the love itself was constructed by the Joker to break him. So it was this wonderful, it was a time where you would sort of be able to get these stories together in script form, but they couldn't quite land in the world. Either somehow the expectations of the object, whether they be audience or corporate or directorial, or it wasn't landing quite in the way I think we imagined when we would put them together on the page. And that, as for Batman and Robin, that one just confuses me.
The words dark and gritty are thrown around a lot when it comes to shifting the tone of superhero stories, but Walker's deleted material makes for a genuinely gruesome and adult read with themes of insanity, and a reminder that beware when fighting monsters lest you yourself become a monster. Walker would later release pages of his own solo-authored draft through his website. A conversation between Bruce Wayne and Alfred in the Batcave just after the Joker goes public advertising the showdown between himself and the Batman. And just before Superman fails to talk Bruce out of pursuing a path of zero-tolerance street vengeance. The scene has Batman convinced that the Joker really is alive, and prepares to go to Metropolis, and he tells Alfred of his last case before he retired, a story the press labeled the Jigsaw Murders. There had been a long string of grave robberies, and then a series of murders all across Gotham. Various body parts were taken from each body, each victim. Batman had hunted down the killer, brought him to justice. There's a flashback to Jonathan Crane, the Scarecrow, locked in Arkham Asylum. The Scarecrow wears a sewn patchwork hat and a freakish, frightening burlap mask. He screams and struggles in his straitjacket as Batman observes. Batman continues his story. Previously, Crane had murdered for personal gain, often stalking those who had tormented his troubled adolescence. Always, he turned each victim's fear against them. But these were random killings without motive. He had taken over a large abandoned meat packing plant, pulled up all the flooring to expose the oil beneath. And that's where he buried the body parts he collected. He buried each piece meticulously, teeth and bones in exact rows. This is where Batman had looked for the answer to what Crane had done, in the cold ground, in the pattern of the bones. At Arkham Asylum, he watches him for hours, waiting for the man to speak, to cry out from his madness. Each day and night, he only stared out his cell window, trance-like, at a solitary plant pot on his windowsill. Batman watched the forensics work on the case, excavating the remains, mapping where each and every bone and body part lay, cataloging every single horror. He studied it all, and still the message eluded him. The hidden meaning, the why. One night, Crane sat staring out that window, exactly as he had during all of Batman's previous visits to Arkham. And then, Batman noticed it. There was a bandage on Crane's hand. Still, he would stare at the windowsill. An asylum guard unlocks the door, allowing Batman in. Batman rushes to the window, grips the flower pot. It's evenly filled with potting soil. Batman throws the flower pot down. It shatters on the floor, dirt scattering. Crane reacts, horrified, letting out a shriek. There, on the floor, in the soil, is Crane's severed finger. Finally, Batman discovers Crane's garden of flesh, growing up from the soil of the abandoned meatpacking plant. Growths of bone and cartilage, beneath the shade of giant, sinewy trees of flesh. Vines pumping blood. Red blossoms. Batman says he saw it all. Worse, he saw its beauty. He couldn't stop seeing it. In his nightmares, in his mind's eye. He says it took a long time for him to leave the garden of flesh behind, but he finally did. Batman turns to Alfred and says, I learned then that while you can fight evil, maybe even fool yourself into believing you can win, you can't fight madness. It's undying, always reborn. You can't fight madness without giving some part of yourself over to it. Alfred replies, Master Bruce, if that is so, how can you pursue the Joker this way? Batman turns away. No reply, only silence. Screenwriter Walker would later say, I was lucky enough to write Batman vs. Superman, but it led to a lot of insomnia. When I got those two characters to go off and fight, I was incredibly weighed by a sense of nervous purpose. It felt like a great responsibility to write these two incredibly iconic characters, and the characters that surrounded them. It was a combination of material kind of stolen, rightfully and legally, from wonderful ideas from the comics, and melding those into an original storyline. I think a lot of the inspiration, if not specifics, like in Frank Miller's work, specifically in those issues of The Dark Knight Returns, Batman, in my opinion, has always been the cooler character. I think in a lot of people's opinions, too. Superman is a bit of a tougher character to deal with. Not just for audiences, but for writers to interpret and make interesting. It's a bit of a cliche at this point. Because he's so invincible, because he's so clean-cut, because there are certain tropes in his world. Superman's a little harder to pull off. There were certain things in the script that I had to look at differently on one side of September 11th and then on the other. It was interesting how Superman was kind of perceived, and is now a little more even. There's a certain amount of difficulty in dealing with the wholesomeness of truth, justice, and the American way, which is Superman's thing. Batman was always seen as darker and more complicated and interesting. But after 9/11, Superman was suddenly much, for lack of a better word, cooler all of a sudden. He was something people kind of needed in a different way than before. And I don't mean to say that lightly. Suddenly, truth, justice, and the American way wasn't ironically wholesome or passé. In a way, he kind of became the character people cherished and wanted a little more. In an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Petersen spoke of Superman's Metropolis and Batman's Gotham City, saying, "They are the bright and the dark side, which essentially is two sides of the same coin. That's the principle of the movie, which reflects what life is all about. Superman stands for what is powerful, clear, bright, noble, and just. Batman is dark, obsessive, and vengeful. Because they are so different, they will inevitably end up clashing. It'll be a battle of the titans. Superman has an unwavering belief in what is right and what is wrong. And it's just not that simple anymore in today's world. While Batman is on a path of self-destruction, he reacts to an act of incredible violence in a way that almost puts him over the edge." When speaking of the title roles and potential casting, Petersen said, "We're not going to go with typical action stars, but great actors who will do an action-oriented part." Petersen also spoke to In Focus magazine, saying, "I mean, we have Batman and Superman in ourselves. We like Batman and we understand him. We suffer with him. On the other hand, we want to be Superman. But they're conflicting philosophies. Let's bring them together in one movie and see how we, as an audience, wrestle with our inner demons." As for casting the two titular roles, Jude Law had the role of Superman. He was happy with the money that was being offered, and they were just ironing out the details on the final contracts when the deal fell apart. It wasn't about money, it was about sequels. Law wasn't adverse to playing Superman in multiple films. He just required a script approval clause on any potential sequel as to not find himself contractually obliged to star in inferior sequels. As for Batman, actor Colin Farrell had agreed in principle to play the Caped Crusader.
Came across an article, a couple articles I wrote 10 years ago this week about you being up for Batman versus Superman.
Oh wow! Yeah.
I mean, and it hit me. I'm like, okay, they just wrapped up the Nolan Batman stuff. So
and now they've made it's
what would your
Brian Singer, not Brian Singer, who made
Superman, Man of Steel, and Dark Knight, and all that.
Yeah, who's the director made Man of Steel? Made Watchmen.
Zack Snyder.
Zack Snyder, yeah.
Well, and now that there's kind of they're going to reboot it again. You're still young enough to play him. Would you want to take a crack?
I don't. I mean, part of me, there's a kid in me that. Not even a kid, but a kid, actually, yes, and an adult in me that would go, yeah, for sure. But I don't know if I mean, Christian did such a brilliant job. I don't know if I'm not saying that I'd get the call, but I don't know if it'd be something I'd be interested in. I don't know if I don't know if I'd be brave enough or bothered enough to know that I was walking into the lion's den of being compared to Christian in that role. Life might be too short for me to have those concerns. Do you know what I mean? It might be. Right. And I just loved what Christian did so much. And I love that trilogy so much,
With Batman expected to battle Superman on screen, off-screen, there was a battle brewing in the boardroom. Batman versus Superman Flyby would create a rift between the two top studio executives. Alan Horn, the president of Warner Brothers, who took over 3 years ago and favored the more feel-good Superman, and Lorenzo Di Bonaventura, the 12-year Warner veteran who backed Superman vs. Batman. In early August, 10 top Warner executives were asked to read both scripts. In effect, they chose Superman as the more marketable movie over the long term. Lorenzo was overruled, said one person involved with the picture. What happened is, the whole company rallied behind Alan. Horn said he had read Abrams' script in mid-July and liked his approach, saying, "In reintroducing these characters, we wanted to do what was in the best interest of the company." That is when Horn took the step of giving both scripts to the Warner executives to read, including representatives from international and domestic theatrical marketing, consumer products, and home video. "It is unusual for us," Horn said, "but I wanted some objectivity. Why not get an opinion or two?" But Horn, unwittingly or not, was rallying more than opinions. He wanted support, too. Warner executives said Horn and DiBonaventura had previously fought over what movies to back, and the Warner executives said DiBonaventura had made no secret of his contempt for the movie The Adventures of Pluto Nash, a $125 million box office bomb distributed by Warner Brothers and made by Castle Rock. Castle Rock was part of AOL Time Warner, and Horn was the co-founder. One Warner producer had said he heard DiBonaventura yelling in the executive suite, demanding that Castle Rock vacate its offices on Warner's lot. Then, in early August, each of the executives who had been given the script filed into a conference room on the second floor near Horn's office to debate which movie the studio should make first. None, except for Terry Brassel and Jeff Robinov, knew which movie DiBonaventura or Horn had favored. Robinov said, "When we gave them the script, we did not want to bias them." One by one, the executives argued each story's merits. DiBonaventura argued the case that Batman vs. Superman was chock full of action, and that the story would be easier to market, while others in the room counter-argued that J.J. Abrams' story was compelling, and with 3 parts, a trilogy would mean triple the number of DVDs, games, and licensed products the studio could sell if the first movie was a hit. If the movie bombed, the studio could still proceed with Batman vs. Superman. All that was left now was the vote. Days later, John Peters, driving with the top down along Highway 1 in Malibu, received a call telling him that Alan Horn needed to speak to him immediately. "We decided to go with Superman," Peters was told. Horn also told him, "Don't talk to the press, let us handle it." Peters recalls that he was so delighted that he began weeping at the wheel as he hung up the phone. Peters says, "I knew in my heart if I failed again, this was 8 years for me, it wouldn't be good. You're gonna think I'm crazy, but I swear I heard the flapping of angel wings when Alan was talking." DiBonaventura, 2 days after the vote, would quit the studio to become an independent producer. Warner executives were quick to say Superman did not precipitate DiBonaventura's departure. "There is no link," Horn told reporters. DiBonaventura had said he wanted less administrative responsibility and hoped to work more closely with writers and directors. But one Warner executive explained, subconsciously, Superman must have been something that added to the pile. The previous month, according to the source, DiBonaventura met in New York with Richard D. Parsons, the chief executive of AOL Time Warner, and Jeff Bukes, the new chairman of the company's entertainment and network group, and discussed his philosophical differences with the way the studio was being run under Mr. Horn. That move, some Warner executives say, was an unwelcome political assault that only hastened his exit. For his part, Horn said, "I respect creative differences. It leads to stimulating conversations. I said I wanted to do Superman. At the end of the day, it's my job to decide what movies we make." TV Guide Online then published an article stating that Christopher Reeve would work with the crew of the solo Superman movie after being asked to work on the production as a consultant. In regards to casting Flyby, the Superman legend was quoted as saying, "In my opinion, the character is more important than the actor who plays him because it is an enduring mythology. I'm sure that they'll cast appropriately and take their time and find the right person. But it definitely should be an unknown. Smallville's Tom Welling would be an ideal candidate. I don't know if he can switch from one job to the other, but I'm sure they'd figure it out." Reeve then said that producer John Peters had scrapped the original Superman vs. Batman idea after seeing his son Matthew's documentary, Christopher Reeve, Courageous Steps, saying, "The positive message of that made him think, why should we have 2 superheroes against each other? So the movie that Warner Brothers is making now, which I will be doing some consulting on, will be a much more uplifting and spiritual story. I was really blown away that they completely decided to change the process." The short-lived project would soon find itself consigned to the shelf, as Warner's would offer Petersen the chance to work on Troy. Petersen would accept the job and say in an interview with MTV, "It was pretty close." And then the studio got a single Superman script, I think from J.J. Abrams at that time. And Warner Brothers chief Alan Horn was so torn, because it's such a fascinating concept to do a Batman versus Superman film. And I still think it would be to do that. But the studio decided to try separate versions of Superman and Batman, and then maybe think about down the road if you want to bring them together in one film. On the other hand, they had Troy. And right away, the studio said, it's not Batman versus Superman, but how about Troy? So it was not so terrible for me because I loved the Troy project. I loved Dark Knight. I was completely sucked into it, blown away by it. I thought right away it deserved an Academy Award for Best Picture, and I was really disappointed that it didn't get it. I thought Heath Ledger was just phenomenal. I'm a big fan of that movie. Of these two projects I have developed at Warner Brothers, I had hoped to make Troy first, and am pleased that the scheduling worked out that way. Petersen told Variety, "I'm looking forward to directing Batman vs. Superman in the future." Sadly, for Petersen's optimism, this incarnation of the story didn't have a future. It was over a decade later that the team-up would be revisited. In 2013, an alternate take on Batman vs. Superman titled Dawn of Justice would be announced as a pseudo-sequel to Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, with Snyder saying, "After Man of Steel finished, and we started talking about what would be in the next movie, I started subtly mentioning that it would be cool if he faced Batman. You're in a story meeting talking about, like, who should Superman fight if he fought this giant alien threat Zod, who was basically his equal physically from his planet fighting on our turf? You know, who to fight next?" But I'm not going to say at all that when I took the job to do Man of Steel, that I did it in a subversive way to get to Batman. I really believe that only after contemplating who could face Superman did Batman come into the picture. And that concludes the brief history of when Wolfgang Petersen harbored ambitions to bring Batman and Superman together in a big-budget, ambitious blockbuster. Thanks for watching.